Welcome to another edition of the Dakotan Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. Today, I am joined by Justis Amundson out of District 30 in Bismarck. Thank you for joining us today, Justice.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So, if I was to run into you on a Saturday afternoon, who would be Justice away from the politics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I would say first and foremost that I'm a Christian and I would consider myself to be a conservative Republican. I'm a husband to my wife, Kimberly. We've been married for under a year, and I'm a father as well. We'll be expecting our first in September. So, between that and politicking, it keeps me pretty busy.
Oh, I'm sure those are two huge things. Being married and then a kid. Congratulations on that. That's way
Thank you.
exciting. Absolutely. Do you enjoy sports or any hobbies or anything like that to keep your mind at rest, or is it go go go?
I enjoy sports. I enjoy reading.
Okay.
So as you can see, I have
Oh,
quite the
there we go.
collection here.
Yeah,
That takes up some time too. I do some work at my church, and
absolutely.
I would say that's mostly my hobbies.
Right.
I'm pretty busy right now between my full time job and running a campaign, so
I'm
I don't
sure.
get to do much. But when I do, I enjoy a lot of reading.
What was the reason or the issue or what was it that prompted you to get into politics?
It's a good question. I've been involved in politics since 2015. I really got started in high school, where I was volunteering for the North Dakota Republican Party, knocking on doors, phone banking, and what have you. In 2016, I went to college and I got involved in some college activism, so the pro life movement. And in 2018, I had the opportunity to work on some statewide legislative campaigns, just volunteer work, internship. And then in 2018, I had an opportunity to work with Senator Kevin Cramer on his Senate race against Heidi Heitkamp. And then it was in 2021 that I decided to run for district chairman and got elected. And then I ran for re-election again in 2023 and was re-elected. So
In 2021, that would have been a different approach or step that you took in politics.
yep.
What prompted you to run for that chair?
Well, there was a lot of talk about wanting to get the district more engaged.
Hmm.
I had been attending my district meetings. Prior to that, I'd served as a delegate to state convention for as many years as I've been able to vote. And I noticed at those meetings, we'd get 30, 40 people would turn out, but I wanted to see more than that. And so I made it my mission to run for office, to get elected, and then to increase the size of the district on the amount of Republicans that are getting involved. And I'm happy to say that I think we've been successful in that.
Awesome.
Nowadays, District 30 meetings draw upwards of 100, I
Wow.
think, which is a pretty significant change.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk about your platform, but before we do that, do want to talk about District 34 a minute. Recently, there was an article put out by the North Dakota Monitor. I'm sure that other news sources carried something similar, at least local ones. But there's just a little bit of controversy going on between the incumbents and then the you and two other candidates that are running for seats in your guys' district. Um, the back and forth. Obviously, the incumbents didn't show up for the endorsing convention. Is there something or any reason that constituents should be worried about what's going on in on the Republican side in District 30?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring that up. The way that I perceive this is that constituents in the district only have so many opportunities throughout the year to meet with their legislators and to ask them questions and, in some ways, to hold them accountable. Um, and so, when we have meetings like this where we have an opportunity for the entire district to gather and the legislators to show up and answer questions and hear suggestions, I don't think it's a good look. Furthermore, I think if you viewed the legislative role as a job, right, and you work for the people or your constituents, and your constituents, your boss calls a meeting, I think you ought to show up. I mean, could you imagine if your boss called a meeting and you decided not to show up? What would be the repercussions of that?
Right.
So at the end of the day, the endorsing convention isn't the end all be all, right? We have the primary system, which allows them to bypass the convention and go to the primary. But I don't think it's classy, and I think it was a mistake. And I see this trend going on statewide where a lot of incumbents decide to bypass the convention because, well, they may give a variety of reasons. Fundamentally, I think it boils down to not wanting to answer the questions that some of the constituents have. And I don't think that's acceptable. And I think that it's not a good look.
Absolutely. It is an interesting trend that is popping up where the endorsing conventions seem to be losing a little bit of value, perhaps, as a lot more people are going to the primary. And it'd be a great discussion for another day. Jumping to your platform, what are the key issues that you are campaigning on?
So, firstly, it's what's on every voter's mind, and that's the southern border, right? The southern border right now is wide open, and it's having a tremendous effect across the country. It's affecting here in North Dakota. My running mates and I had the opportunity to go a ride along with our local police department, and we did a day shift and a night shift. And the perspective and appreciation for law enforcement that we received on this ride along, I can't even put it into words. The things that we saw in just these short 2-3 hour shifts, it's incredible. And I can tell you with fact that what's going on at the southern border is impacting North Dakota. I mean, fentanyl related overdoses and crimes are going up. Crimes related to fentanyl are going up 60% in North Dakota. And then you have drug trafficking, human trafficking, what have you. So that's the number one issue that we've seen door to door is crime and what we're going to do about that. So we like to support our law enforcement.
Yeah.
Um,
So
we go ahead.
interjecting in there, you said that the feedback that you were getting for the law enforcement as you were riding along with them was incredible. Was it good respect, or was it negative? What was going on there?
So yeah, so the experience of getting to go along with them and see what they have to put up with was incredible.
Yeah, right.
So maybe I didn't phrase that correctly. What I'm trying to say is that what our law enforcement has to deal with, especially knowing that they're short staffed right now, it's I expected it to be bad in Bismarck crime, but I did not expect to see what we saw in these short couple of hours.
Yeah.
With law enforcement being understaffed and with what's going on at the southern border, along with just the criminal justice system in Bismarck and in North Dakota itself, where a lot of these drug traffickers are being picked up by the police, brought to the jail and then back on the streets just a couple of days later. And it's putting a strain on our local police department.
That really is sad. It's something that I think is easy to overlook because we're a northern state, a very northern state. And if you ask outsiders, they'll question whether or not we're part of the United States because we're so northern. So it's difficult for sometimes people to connect us to a southern border problem. But a lot of people are bringing this up in connection to fentanyl and what that is starting to do in the state and how it's wreaking havoc. What are some of the solutions that you have top of mind that may be able to help fix the problem?
Yeah, well, addiction counseling is always a plus, but I think the fundamental issue has to be what are we doing with these fentanyl traffickers? And are we allowing them back onto the streets too quickly? And is the punishment fitting the crime? And just based on the conversations I've had with law enforcement during my ride alongs, I can tell you that the police would like to see harsher sentencing for some of these manufacturers and dealers. And actually, funny enough, North Dakota had mandatory minimums for drug sentencing or for drug manufacturing and dealing up until 2019. Actually, we had mandatory minimums in place for repeat offenders. And in 2019, the legislature decided to do away with it, and the governor signed it. And since then, you can actually go back from 2019 to now, and you can see the effects that that's had on drug-related crimes.
Wow.
So,
very interesting. I interrupted you as you were going through your platform. What's your second issue?
Property taxes. I mean, door to door, the most common thing we hear is, what are you going to do about property taxes? Property taxes are too high, and there's a lot of proposals being thrown out right now. We have Rick Becker's statewide measure that's dominating public conversation, but what we're looking at is this measure may or may not pass. So what are we going to do it from a legislative standpoint if given the opportunity to do so?
So, and I think this is an interesting question. I won't ask you to comment on whether or not you support Dr. Becker's measure that he's working on, but I'll ask you to comment on this aspect of it. That is a constitutional amendment. So
Sure.
that is something that is very firm and difficult to change. In order for it to get as far as it to get into law, there's going to have to be a 2/3 majority vote. There's all the petitions that have to go on. There's a lot of things that have to happen in order for that to get put into law, which also means it's difficult to change if it doesn't quite meet the needs of everything that's going on. A legislative route is not as firm, so it'd be easier to get repealed down the road, perhaps. But it also is easier to meet the needs if perhaps there's not enough funding in certain areas that property taxes would normally fund, things like that. What do you think is the best approach? Doing it through a constitutional amendment, whether it's Dr. Becker's deal or if there's a different measure that should be put together, or doing it through a legislative?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to answer that. But before I do, I'd just like to kind of flip that question on its head. And I think the question that's going to be on voters' mind is, do we trust the legislature to do something about this? There was a measure in 2012 to abolish property taxes, and it failed pretty significantly. And at the time, the legislature promised, hey, don't kill this way. We're going to address it in the legislature. Well, it's been 10 plus years. Have they done anything about property taxes? And, I think a lot of people would say no. They haven't done enough to address this. And so I do support the measure. I'll be voting for it. I'm running a separate campaign. I'm not out there collecting signatures
Right.
for it. And if it does fail, I still plan to address it at the legislative level. But yeah, I think the fundamental question is, can the legislature be trusted to address it? And I
Right.
would say no.
And so, one more question on property tax, and this is typically what is heard by the naysayer uh, of abolishing or getting rid of property taxes, and that is local control. Do
Yep.
you see local municipalities losing control over the things that are so dear to cities, to townships, to counties? Do you see those things being lost?
Potentially. I think Representative Becker has done a significant job on his website where it addresses a lot of these questions. From my understanding, I'm not as worried about the local control because, Rick has assured and many other lawmakers have assured that have signed on to this measure that all of this funding is still going to be in place, right? You know, I think the most interesting aspect of local control would be at an even fundamental level, allowing citizens at the county level to vote on whether or not they want to see property taxes increase or decrease. To me, that's local control. That's local control at its utmost level. And unfortunately, attempts in the legislature to get legislation like that passed have always been killed. And so I would argue right now we don't have local control. And I would like to see more local control.
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep moving on your platform unless there's something you want to add to property tax. What is a third issue that you have?
Well, parental rights. It's huge. I'm sure you've seen on the news that in the state of Montana recently, there was a 14-year-old child that was taken away from their parents. Parents lost custody because they refused to affirm the gender identity of the 14-year-old. Now, this is Montana. This is not California. This is a supposed red state, not that far from North Dakota, right? And so some of these gender ideological issues, they're coming to North Dakota. And in some cases, they're already here. And a lot of times you hear, people in the legislature say, well, that's not happening here, so we don't need to address it. Well, listen, the law should not be reactive. We shouldn't be reacting to the current day's problem. We should look at the trend of what's happening in the country and in the red states surrounding us, uh, South Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, what's happening there, because it'll be here soon. And so we need to get ahead of the curve, and we need to make sure that what happened in Montana can never happen in North Dakota.
Absolutely. Very good. Is there anything else that you want? I know those are three issues. If you go to your Facebook page, there's a lot more. Is there anything else that you want to add as part of something core that would stand out to a voter in your platform?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that we stand on. We stand on cutting wasteful spending. Going back to tax reform, I don't think you can have truly meaningful tax reform without cutting wasteful spending, right? It's like putting a band aid on an open wound. So, cutting spending is going to be key. I mean, if you look at the state of South Dakota and compare it to North Dakota, relatively similar in size of population and density, but North Dakota is outspending South Dakota significantly, right? So cutting wasteful spending is huge. We're pro-life, pro-family, pro-teacher. We would like to help retain and recruit more teachers. There is a teacher shortage in North Dakota. We stand with veterans, and we stand with property rights. I know the CO2 pipeline is on a lot of people's minds, and we definitely side with the landowners.
Absolutely. So, going back to one of the first things that you mentioned, cutting wasteful spending, cutting budgets. This is always an interesting topic to me because, and I've used the analogy before, so to the viewers, I apologize, but it's always a good time when, in theory, my wife and I talk about making budget cuts, but it's always a difficult time when we actually go through the budget and decide which things we're cutting out of our budget. Then it gets a little bit real, and it's a lot less fun at that point in the conversation. And sometimes,
Sure.
it doesn't go as smooth. Sometimes there's a little controversy in the home, and we have to figure some things out. Same thing at the state level. It's good for us to talk about being a little more fiscally responsible, but are there some things that you would consider cutting? Whether that's specific things that you have in mind or whether that's just a generality of these are areas that we need to cut back in.
The cronyism, the special interest corporate handouts. If you can't go to a bank and receive a loan to cover this, why are we putting on the back of taxpayers? That's the way I approach it. Bismarck taxpayers should not be funding amusement parks in Jamestown. They shouldn't be funding libraries in Medora. I mean, these sort of corporate handouts, to me, it's a waste of taxpayer money, and it's insulting. When property taxes are this high, we should not be worrying about making sure that, every corporation or every special interest that approaches the legislature looking for a handout gets one. It's going to require people saying no,
Right.
and I'm prepared to do that.
Absolutely. Why should somebody in District 30 vote for you?
Well, I think my platform is more closely aligned with the voters in District 30. I think that on the issues that people care about, crime, property taxes, parental rights, I'm going to be the candidate that's going to deliver on those things to the best of my ability. But then additionally, I'm willing to show up. I answer my phones, I answer my email, I show up to public meetings, and I make myself available. And so if you have questions, comments, or concerns, if you reach out to me, you'll hear back from me. I can't say the same from the opposition because the opposition had a chance to congregate with the district and give their pitch for why they should be reelected, and they chose not to. So.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today, Justis. If somebody wants to support you, whether that's by asking a question or just seeing what your platform is, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, well, they can reach out to our Facebook page. So that's facebook.com/30GOP. Pretty simple. Or they could email me directly. So they could reach out at Amundson4, as in the number, nd@gmail.com.
Very good. Thank you very much. This has been another episode of the Dakotan Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr. Be sure to go to mydakotan.com, click Election Central. There you'll see a bunch more interviews like this one, other news concerning the 2024 election cycle, and a database of candidates that are running for election this year, so you can learn more about those candidates. Thank you for watching. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube, become part of the Dakotan community. Thanks, and have a great day.